On guys, today we are looking at Texas A&M basketball here, and I think Coach Buzz Williams. He's one of my favorite coaches. He gets a lot out of his teams. Last year's team is a great example. They had kind of like a up and down year, but then at the end of the year they played really well. They put Manny Obaseki into the starting lineup, and they took off at the end of the season, and they gave Houston everything they could handle in that second round game in the NCAA tournament. Coach Buzz Williams is entering his sixth season at Texas A&M, which is pretty crazy because it feels like just yesterday he was at Virginia Tech. They were 21-15 last year, 9-9, which was seventh in the SEC, one of the toughest conferences in the country. Like I mentioned, 1-1 in the NCAA tournament and 2-1 in the SEC tournament, losing to Florida just before the championship game. So without further ado, like we do in each one of these videos, going to go through the roster, then the starting lineup and rotation. And then lastly, I'll break down the schedule and give you my predictions for the season. So when you look at the roster moves for a team like Texas A&M, there's a lot of guys who came back and only two guys who left. But one of them is a really big piece in Tyrese Radford, who came over with Coach Buzz Williams from Virginia Tech and was a really important player for this team last season. Was their second leading scorer. They're the backcourt mate with Wade Taylor, an incredible rebounder for the position, averaged over six rebounds per game despite being a guard, and was just really important for the team last season. And then Wildens Levesque, he didn't play a ton of minutes, but he was their starting center and just gave them some size at the position when Coach Buzz Williams wanted to go with it. But he didn't play a ton of minutes. Like, he played just under 10 minutes per game, so it's not the biggest loss, I would say. So who's back for Texas A&M? Well, a lot of guys. Wade Taylor, who's their leading scorer, their best player. Manny Obaseki, who was arguably their most important player because they certainly changed as a team once he became a starter. Anderson Garcia, Solomon Washington, and Henry Coleman are all back as forwards. Excuse me. And then Jace Carter and Hayden Hefner are like guard wings, more of a wing in Hefner's case, who are rotation players who are back this year for Texas A&M. So when you count it up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rotation players are back for a team that, yes, went 21-15, which isn't the best record, but closed really strong. And so I think they can build on that momentum this year with some of these new guys coming in to be reinforcements, but also you got to replace Radford and you got to replace the size of Levesque. And I think they did a good job of doing that, plus some. So you got Zurich Phelps from SMU, who averaged 15 points per game, but was very inefficient. But it was also a good defender, 2 steals per game. Pharrell Payne is a big man from Minnesota, averaged about 10.6 rebounds, just over a block per game. I think he can do a good job filling in that Levesque role, plus maybe a little bit more. And then CJ Wilcher is the last transfer from Nebraska, 6'5", three-point shooter. Played really well at Nebraska as a spacer last year, I thought. Saw a few of his games, and I think he'll do a good job of just adding to the rotation for Texas A&M. They had 3 freshmen come in. Andre Mills, who's ranked 91st, George Turkson, 122nd, and Chris McDermott, 151st. And as we'll get into here in the rotation, I'll just say it up front, I think it's going to be hard for those 3 guys to crack the rotation because of how experienced the rest of this roster is. Now, if they do, I think it says a lot about them. They've probably earned the minutes. And look, I haven't seen them play in high school, so I don't have a good feel for their play, but I'm just basing this off of experience. And so, with that being said, I project the starting lineup to be very similar to what it closed with last season, but you got to replace Radford and Levesque. And so I've done so with Wade Taylor. He still starts. Zurich Phelps replaces Radford. Manny Obaseki, he's still starting. Solomon Washington, he's still starting. And I think Pharrell Payne replaces Williams Levesque at that center spot, which means Anderson Garcia, Henry Coleman, CJ Wilcher, Jace Carter, and Hayden Hefner are your 5 guys off the bench. Texas A&M last season liked to go about 10 guys deep, so I could see them 9-10 guys. So I could see them being in this range this season. I think they have a very deep roster, and I think they have a lot of guys who play the way Coach Williams wants them to play. Physical, basketball, defensively minded, and they've got some forwards who may not be like the tallest, but they're strong and they can rebound. And I like Anderson Garcia as a draft analyst is somebody who I don't expect to be drafted this year. He's like 24 years old, but I do think he's a guy who can make a team because he understands his role, and he's one of the best rebounders in the country, and he can do the little things as well. He's just a great player to have on a team, really on any team. But I think they've got a few guys like that on this team when you look at just guys who just know their roles. And I think that's really important for a team who's looking to do a little bit better than last season for Texas A&M. So, look, now I think is an appropriate time to start looking at the schedule and predictions for Texas A&M, because I think they've got a clear pecking order. You got Wade Taylor, you got Manny Obaseki. We'll see how good George Phelps is this season. Can he be a little bit more efficient? And you've got your forwards, Solomon Washington, Henry Coleman. You got shooters off the bench in Wilcher and Hefner. It's a really good roster. So, schedule and predictions time. Non-conference, I think this is one of the tougher non-conference schedules. It's not necessarily that they have a ton of really high-quality teams, but they have very few tune-up games, if you will. They'll play at home versus Ohio State, and then they'll play in the Players Era Festival in Las Vegas, where they'll take on Oregon, Creighton, and San Diego State. And then the SEC ACC Challenge against Wake Forest at home. And then neutral site games with Texas Tech in Texas, closer to A&M than it is to Texas Tech, that game. And then Purdue in Indianapolis, much closer to Purdue. So when you look at that schedule, you've got 7 really, not really tough, but tough non-conference opponents, which I really like for a team like Texas A&M, getting them ready for one of the 2 toughest conferences in college basketball, the SEC. In conference play, home and away games, LSU, Oklahoma, and Texas. And at home, they'll have Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, Georgia, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt. And on the road, it will be Florida, Kentucky, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Missouri, and South Carolina. So how do I see this team? How do I see this all shaking out for Texas A&M? Well, I think because of continuity, and I like some of the pieces they added in, the way they finished last season. Like I said, I think they can build off of that. But I do think they have a tough schedule, and I do think the SEC is going to be a challenge. So I have them going 10-3 in non-conference play. I think they could lose a couple of these games. However, I think that's a little bit conservative. I could see it being 11-2 because of the continuity that this team has. I think they can pick up with some of the momentum that they had last year and just kind of keep rolling. So I could see this being 11-2, maybe even 12-1. So I just want to let you guys know which way I'm leaning. I don't think maybe it's 9-4, but I certainly don't see 8-5. But that's why I ended up at 10-3. Conference play, I think they're gonna go 11-7. I think it's a really good team, and I think the SEC is just a challenge. But again, if I were to lean one way or the other, it's more positive. So 12-6, maybe 13-5 for this Texas A&M team. I don't think it goes the other way. I just think there's too much talent, and the pieces seem to fit well. Continuity, everything seems to be turning in the right direction for this program. So I had them finishing with the same number of wins that they had last year before they got to tournament play, which is 21. So 21-10. I think that certainly gets them into the NCAA tournament. And they don't have to quite, last year they had to win a couple games in the SEC tournament to kind of firmly get them in. They were on the bubble. I think this year they'll be outside of that bubble picture and firmly in the tournament with this record because of how strong the SEC is and the quality opponents that they scheduled in conference or non-conference play. But I'm curious. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. How do you think Texas A&M is going to do this year? If you're a fan of another program, what program is that? And I'll profile them before we get to the start of the season. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe, tell a friend. We're doing college basketball, NBA draft content here on Talking Ball. I'm Jack. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.